Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Andrea, are you ready?
Yes.
And do we have staff here who's presenting on Complete Street Study session?
Yes.
I see Marissa.
Yes.
Okay. All right, we can get started. We're recording. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. We will call the Los Altos City Council study session of Tuesday, November 9th, 2021 to order at 4:01 p.m. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Liang.
Here.
Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Here.
Vice Mayor Enander.
Here.
Mayor Fleger.
Here.
Thank you. The full council is present.
Thank you. And Councilmember Meadows, you sounded a little low when you said here. I don't know if you need to turn up your volume.
All right, I'll do that just in case.
Okay, thank you. Much better. So we have quorum. Next, we will move to public comment. And this is a study session on only one agenda item. And so if there are members of the public here who would like to comment on this item, now is the time to do so. And the item is the draft Complete Streets Master Plan. City Clerk, do we have any speakers who would like to comment on this item?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we have one speaker, and that's Nancy Seaman.
Thank you. So let's give Nancy 3 minutes.
Oh, hello. Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm Nancy Seaman. I live at 201 Valencia Drive, which is at the corner of Almond Avenue. This year, the Los Altos High School had locked their drop-off zone. They locked the gate so that parents could not drop off there. So instead, they've been coming over and dropping off on Valencia Drive. And that means they cut across the bike lane from between Almond and Valencia Drive. This is towards San Antonio from the high school. And that corner is a mess. So I really appreciate that the Safe Streets Commission has submitted major changes for the corner, both to reducing the number of lanes being used so that there's just one lane going in each direction. Right now, they're normally 2 lanes on the left-hand side. They're used as 2 lanes, 1 turn lane for the right turn and 1 turn lane for the left. And also we need space for the pedestrians to walk along the route just at the end of Valencia near Almond. For the past several months, we've had gates put there, temporary no stopping gates. But even with the no stopping sign, the red curb, and those temporary gates, we still have cars stopping there. So it has really gotten to be a problem, and it's quite dangerous for pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers going through the intersection. So I appreciate all the help we can get at that corner.
Great. And thanks for letting us know, Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have another hand raised, City Clerk?
Yes, we do. The last name is Jane.
Mayor, I had a clarifying question for Ms. Seaman, please.
Is Ms. Seaman still?
Yes, I'm still here.
Go ahead, Councilmember Liang.
So Ms. Seaman, you were stating how all these closures were temporary. When you were notified that this was temporary?
They were not temporary.
Okay, so they're permanent closures then.
I brought that question up initially at the beginning of the year. The high school said the drop-off zone was closed due to construction. But I asked them when it would be open because we had such issues over on the corner. And they say, no, they don't intend to open it ever, even after the new construction.
Okay.
I asked when they would open the drop-off zone on the eastern side. There's a through route that goes through. And they said, no, they don't plan to use that for drop-off. They don't plan to help have any drop-off zones. I
Thank you
saw
for the
that there's a,
clarification
oh, I'm
because
sorry.
I guess I got confused because you were referencing temporary. So these are actually permanent expectations we can.
So I definitely think Councilmember Liang, you know, I think it's something worth looking into. I think Ms. Seaman is letting us know based on the information she has. And because this is doing public comment, I don't want it to turn into a discussion. And so I really appreciate Nancy bringing this up, and maybe we can follow up with staff to reach out to the high school and figure out what's going on. But thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker's last name is Jane.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Gaurav Jain. I live on Panchita Way. This is my first time at this session, so please forgive me if I'm asking something that is maybe a little bit more obvious. But I had a chance to look over the planned complete streets, and from my understanding, one of the initiatives was the inclusion of a lot of speed bumps around Panchita Way, Valencia, a lot of around the north end of the high school. And my understanding is that when there was community review feedback done earlier in the year, there was opposition towards the speed bumps. And so I'm not sure what the process is, whether the draft plan that's going to be that's been shown right now is going to be revised based on that community feedback or not. But from my perspective, it wasn't absolutely clear what is the difference between the draft plan versus revisions that are going to be expected, and what were perhaps maybe the changes that happened as a result of the community feedback. And just a further maybe commentary is I just wanted to share that I know that there's been other initiatives such as on Questa to add speed bumps, and there's been a lot of concerns about those speed bumps, about the size of those speed bumps. So I just wanted to make sure that the community feedback is properly being taken into account for the master plan, and that's communicated accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav. And if you're going to stay on for the meeting, I'll make sure that staff addresses those two questions that you've raised, because I do think it's important for the public to understand those two areas. I don't see any more hands, City Clerk. Do we have any other speakers?
No, there are no other people indicating a desire to speak.
Thank you. So then let's move to our only discussion item for this study session, and I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and distinguished council. We are excited to present this highly anticipated draft Complete Streets Master Plan. We have done a plethora of community outreach and work, and that has gone on for over a year. And as a side note to the last speaker, there will be more community outreach once the elements of the plan are implemented and ready for design. So the team will talk more about that when we get into the presentation. But I would like to introduce you to the transportation team that spearheaded this project and who will present and answer questions this afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to introduce the city's transportation services manager, Marisa Lee, the consulting firm Alta Planning and Design who developed the plan. Their project manager, Jeff Knowles, is here and will be presenting. And then consultant Jaime Rodriguez with Traffic Patterns. He will be a little late, but he will be here in time to answer questions. So without further ado, Marisa, go for it.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Marisa Lee. I'm the new Transportation Services Manager for the City of Los Altos. I'm here with my former colleague, Jeff Knowles, and we will be presenting the Complete Streets Master Plan, which is currently in draft form. As most of you might remember, the Complete Streets Master Plan for Los Altos is near to my heart because I was on the consulting team that was working on it before I joined the city of Los Altos this summer. So Jeff, I think this is your screen. If you want to go to the next slide, we can get started. This is our agenda tonight. This is everything that we'll be talking about. We are going to walk you through the various parts of the plan. So that's going to include first the vision and goals that we use to inform the plan. And then we will talk about an overview of the plan. We'll give you an overview of the community engagement that was conducted, and then our plan priorities. And then we will talk about implementation of the plan, how to put it into action in the future. We'll talk about next steps, and then we will take your questions and comments. So the first thing we want to talk about is the vision and goals of the plan. And the vision and goals of the plan really shaped all of the recommendations that came out of the plan. And these were carefully developed in collaboration with the community and the staff and the Complete Streets Commission, and also the Complete Streets Task Force that was formed just for this purpose. So we went through a few rounds of revisions, generating the vision and goals so that we could really establish what was important to the community. So the vision of this plan is for our community-focused and sustainable streets, to empower people of all ages and abilities to access destinations comfortably, safely, and conveniently, regardless of their mode of transportation. So this is really aimed at incorporating people of all ages, all different abilities, children, elderly people, and regardless of mode of transportation. That means people biking, people walking, people taking transit, and people driving. And this aligns with National Complete Streets policy and guidance, and also aligns with the city goals. Next slide, please. The goals were also developed similarly to the vision. It was a combination effort between staff, the community that gave input, the Complete Streets Commission, and also the Complete Streets Master Plan Task Force. So the goals that really shaped the plan were as follows: to increase activity, so walking and biking activity in the city of Los Altos, to improve safety, and that's safety for everyone who's traveling, to create connected networks. So that means to kind of identify gaps in the existing network and really think strategically about how to create connections in those areas and fill in the gaps. The fourth was to address climate change impacts. So as we know, emissions are a major part of climate change, and emissions from vehicles, that is. And so by making walking and biking easier in Los Altos, and easier, more safe, and more enjoyable, we hope to have an impact there. Community input and robust community input was really important to the plan. So Jeff will talk about this more in a later slide, but we used lots of different methodologies to reach residents via various different formats. And that included online, surveys, a mapping tool that Jeff will describe, and site visits. And then the sixth goal was to evaluate progress and adjust. Next slide. So now we will give the overview of the plan. Before we do that, we wanted to talk about the vision and goals first, because like I mentioned, all the vision and goals were really what fed into all of the recommendations. And so those were really carefully selected so that we could move forward into all the recommendations that you'll see later. Next slide. So this was the scope of work for the plan. Previously in place were a bicycle transportation plan and a pedestrian master plan from 2012 and 2015, respectively. The first item in the scope of work for the CSMP was to consolidate those and update them. So move them into one plan that would address, like I mentioned, pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, and vehicles all together, which is kind of a new approach, modern approach to a transportation plan that's being implemented by lots of cities. The second item was to refresh and expand the Safe Routes to Schools component. So there were some Safe Routes to School plans that had been done in a previous effort. And so we wanted to look at those, make sure that they were still current, add new things as needed, expand upon them, and really make sure that those were as robust as they could be. Next, we wanted to develop some concept plan line drawings for a few streets. And so those streets were selected in combination with City Council and the Complete Streets Commission and staff and community input. And so those are what was mentioned earlier. Those are kind of really meant for visioning purposes. So we put together some concept drawings and we presented them to the community, neighborhood by neighborhood, and we got community input. Some of the elements of those drawings were well received by the community. Some weren't preferred by the community. And so we used that to inform what we included in the list of recommendations, which is in the plan. So the concept plan line drawings are still in the plan in the appendix, and those are just for reference as a record of kind of what we presented to the community. None of those are intended to be for construction purposes or implementation purposes right now. The ones that were well received by the community will be likely to be moved forward in terms of implementation at some point in the future. And at that time, there will be extensive, further study, further design, a lot more community outreach to hone in on the details of those drawings. And the ones that were not particularly preferred by the community may be not moved forward with. So we might just leave those in the appendix as a record, but not move forward with them if the community doesn't support them. And the fourth scope of work was to engage the community and use their input, which, like I mentioned, we will walk you through in a future slide. Next slide, please. This was our process and our timeline for the Complete Streets Master Plan. We gathered a lot of data on existing conditions. We examined the existing plans that I mentioned, the pedestrian plan and the bike plan that were pre-existing. We did site visits at every school in Los Altos and also the ones that are kind of on the outside edge of town that some of the Los Altos students do attend. We did extensive community outreach. We got public input via online surveys and via Complete Streets Commission meetings and via the meetings with the task force and also with focused community neighborhood meetings. In the spring of 2021, we started developing project ideas. This was a collaboration between the consultant, Alta Planning and Design, and staff. And that really incorporated all of the pinpoints that were pointed out on the online mapping tool that the residents were encouraged to use to pinpoint their areas of concern and the recommendations that they were interested in. So that was a big idea generating phase. Then we took all of the ideas that had been generated and we used kind of a prioritization process where we came up with metrics that were derived directly from the vision and goals. And we applied those kind of systematically to all of the project ideas. And that was what generated the list of recommendations that you'll see in the draft plan. And these are our results. So I'll walk you through some of the elements that are in the plan. This is the cover of our plan that Alta put together for us. And on the next slide is our updated walk and roll maps. So these are maps that show students and families suggested routes to schools. So there's one for each school in the Los Altos area. And we worked closely with the consultant and with the community to identify routes that we would encourage students to use. And these maps are really, planned for families to sit down and parents to help their kids work together on deciding what route they'll take to walk or bike to school. So we updated 10 of those and we created a few additional ones that were not included in the previous plan. This is the other side. So these are distributed in both digital and hard copy format. And they were also made into an app that can be used on a website. This is the other side of the hard copy version. So the hard copy versions were dropped off at all the different schools in Los Altos in the area. And this is the other side. So it shows some safety tips and some biking information, and gives students some information on how to be safe and visible when they're walking and biking to school. This is the website that I mentioned. So those suggested routes to school maps were incorporated into a website that was developed in collaboration with some of the adjacent cities. So it's a website and it's also a map, an app, I mean, for both Apple phones and Android phones. And this is something that parents and students can use and download and use to, like I said, kind of route their maps to school, work with their kids to figure out the best route to get there via foot or on foot or via bike. And there's also some tools within the app where parents and kids can coordinate with each other to establish meetup places, and they can meet up and walk to school together. And also a feature that includes kind of a push notification for updates from the school. These are school improvement plans. So these were coordinated with the walk and roll maps that you just saw. And so these were really focused at infrastructure recommendations along the suggested routes. And these include things like curb ramps and crosswalks, bike lanes, and signage. And this is all aimed at bike and pedestrian comfort and safety, and making bikes and peds more visible to motorists. These also are aimed at improving the congestion in the school areas during the drop off and the pickup time. So some of these suggest kind of some alternate areas to perhaps park and walk your child to school, or increasing bike and pedestrian activity with increased infrastructure. So in hopes of alleviating the drop off vehicular traffic that happens in the morning and the afternoon. The concept plan line drawings we discussed. This is an overview map of the areas where concept plan line drawings were developed, and these were aimed at kind of getting a little bit deeper into some visioning for bike and ped improvements around the city. So like I mentioned, we had focused outreach meetings for kind of each area so that the community could kind of weigh in. The drawings are conceptual, they're purely for visioning, and we really wanted to use this as kind of just an early opportunity to get feedback from the community and kind of vision what could be done in the future. So like I said, some of the improvements were well received in the outreach, and those were incorporated into the list of recommendations in the plan. Some of the ones that were not well received were not incorporated into the plan. And like I mentioned, this is a work in progress. And so at the point in time when some of these areas become capital improvement projects, there will be extensive outreach again, getting community feedback, additional studies, additional more detailed design. And Jeff is going to walk you through the community engagement. So I will pass it off to him.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Again, I'm Jeff Knowles, your consultant from Alta Planning and Design. I want to walk you through the outreach strategies that were involved. Our strategy involved online and some in-person work. The project website and interactive web map was developed for this project. We developed a community survey online. We developed and worked with a Complete Streets task force that met 4 times. We had 3 community workshops, 12 Complete Street Commission meetings focused on various elements of this master plan, and meetings with the school community. So if you haven't been to our website, Complete Streets, Los Altos Complete Streets Plan.com will take you there, and it has all information about the plan, events that were coming up, how to get engaged, the different study elements that Marisa walked you through, areas for providing survey, the interactive web map, which I'll share in just a second, and ways to contact us through an online form. This is an example, a screenshot of that interactive online map where members of the public can drop points about barriers to walking and bicycling, destinations where they'd like to be able to walk and bike more often, and routes that they take. The online map received 684 individual responses and over 2,200 comments between January and April 2021. And this feedback directly led into the development of recommendations. This is the screenshot of the online survey. It was an 11-question survey that was open from January to April of this year. We received 338 responses, and those results are published in Appendix A of the plan. We've raised awareness about the plan through newspaper ads in the town crier, citywide postcards at the beginning of the process, additional mailers for each of our community workshops to neighbors that would be along the different concept plan line routes, and A-frame signs that were set up also out in the field in advance of those meetings. And so these are some examples of what those postcards look like and some of the online meetings. And there's Marisa presenting one of the concept plan line drawings around Loyola Corners. As I mentioned, we met with an ad hoc task force 4 times between February and June, representing your city council, Councilmember Jonathan Weinberg. We had 2 members of the Complete Streets Commission, Suzanne Ambiel and Cindy Yang. Youth Commission had 2 of your commissioners, Arti and Sander, joined us. Gave a lot of great input, made every meeting, really enjoyed getting their perspective in the plan. Parks and Rec Commission, represented by Teresa Morris, Chris Hober from Greentown, Los Altos, and Alon Golan from a local resident representing some bicycle interests as an advocate. We had extensive interaction with a steering committee composed from your Complete Streets Commission. And I'd say extensive. This is more than any other project I've ever worked on in my 12 years as far as interacting with your council appointed commission. So we met with them 12 times, and these were our topics. We talked about introducing the plan. They helped us revise our community engagement strategy to be most effective. They reviewed our existing conditions. We workshopped vision and goals and priorities with them. They reviewed our Safe Routes to School materials. We brought back the vision and goals and priorities so that they could provide feedback. Same with Safe Routes to Schools. They reviewed our concept plan line drawings and our network recommendations and the results of our prioritization process, which they helped set the criteria and scoring for. They also gave us feedback on how the city can implement these projects effectively. And then finally, they reviewed the draft plan. So what's in this plan? We've talked about a lot about the process. So what's actually in it? So we developed recommendations by using your vision and your goals, the data analysis that we went through, and community input to come up with an objective prioritization process that led to these projects. So first, there are bicycle network recommendations, and they fall into multiple different facility types, right? You have first, and these are from Caltrans, your classes, you have a shared use path, which is kind of like a trail. That's a class 1 facility. Bicycle lanes, which I think most people understand, that's a designated space for bicycles that's separated by paint. There's also buffered bicycle lanes. And so very similar, this just adds some painted space that separates motor vehicles from bicyclists. There's a class 3 bicycle route. These are typically on low volume, think neighborhood streets where there's not a lot of traffic that are going at low speeds. This is where there's typically not enough space for a bicycle lane. And so bicyclists are sharing the road with vehicles. And then finally, a new designation, our class 4, they're called separated bikeways. It's kind of a split between a bicycle lane and a trail. There's a physical barrier between the bike lane and the motor vehicles. And that could take the form of, like an image here, it could take plantings, it could have just vertical posts, it could have parked cars. There's a lot of different elements that could go into that. And so we went through all of the data analysis and public input and created a map of different recommendations on your city streets that list out your existing and our recommended classes here. We've also identified a couple study corridors that will need additional analysis. There's no set recommendation at this time. And then this is just a zoom in looking closer at your downtown there. A lot of their pedestrian focus is about getting to retail downtown, and also for us, a core connection was getting people to and from the downtown as a major destination. On the walking side, the pedestrian network recommendations, there are corridor improvements, and those are sidewalks and pathways. There are many different ways that pedestrians can be accommodated on your city streets in Los Altos. They don't all have to be kind of urban style concrete sidewalks. There are a lot of different paths that could be asphalt berms. There could be crushed gravel walking paths. And so we want to make sure that it's context sensitive to Los Altos. And then there are 3 different types of improvements at intersections, and we call these spot improvements. So how do people cross the street? So there are crossing improvements like adding marked crosswalks. We can work on adding signals and signs like stop signs. And then there are roadway designs that can be used to calm traffic and incorporate green stormwater elements like this curb extension shown here. So altogether, we looked at all the data we received and came up with recommendations for new sidewalk or walkways, enhancing or doing major maintenance on your existing sidewalks and walkways. And then we added 65 different spot improvements at intersections. And so this is a zoom in the map so you can see some areas where there's a lot clustered together in the downtown and around Loyola Corners. Something else we came up with, and this was directly from the Complete Streets Commission, their idea was to come up with a connected network. Instead of just taking on each individual bikeway project or walkway project on its own and piecemeal, they helped us spur this idea of a Los Altos loop. So this incorporates high priority internal crosstown connections, so helping people get to every park and school and getting across major barriers that divide the city, along with these purple connections, which are your multi-jurisdictional, regional routes to get to other cities, to regional destinations like El Camino Real, Stevens Creek Trail, Foothill Expressway and Homestead Road, and then downtown to downtown connections between Los Altos and Mountain View. So altogether, this loop really forms the backbone of a network that once built will help connect pretty much anybody getting out their front door on this route to their destination. In sum, we had 200 project recommendations that composed 42 miles of bikeways, 10 miles of pedestrian walkways, and 65 spot improvements. We ran that through a prioritization process because we know that you don't have the resources to accomplish everything in the next 10 or 20 years. But we want to make sure that staff have good guidance about where to begin. So we looked at things that were important in the vision and goals about connecting people to destinations, providing safe routes to schools, making sure that we reflected ideas that came directly from the community, reducing collisions, rewarding projects that were easy to facilitate and feasible, projects that increase the comfort of people walking and bicycling, and looking at geographic equity, making sure that no area of the town was left apart. That came up with a set of high priority projects, 5 walkways that were close to 3 miles, 21 bikeway projects that are around 14 miles, and 12 spot improvements. So altogether, your high priority projects composed $14 million worth of investments. I've got these slides here. We can return to them in your Q&A. It's also highlighted in the draft plan that's available, but I just wanted to hit on these, breeze through these pretty quickly. There are high priority walkways on San Antonio, El Camino Real, Sherwood, San Antonio from Sherwood to El Camino, and then Jordan Avenue. High priority bikeways on Foothill, Covington, El Monte, San Antonio, Miramonte, let's see, El Camino Real, Newcastle, and all these are here with the recommendations. There are, let's see, I think 12 of these here. And then high priority spot improvements. And so these are the project IDs that correspond with the map that I showed. It's also in the plan and those intersection locations. So I'm going to turn things back over to Marisa and talk about how the city can get this work done.
So next we'll talk, thank you, Jeff. Next we'll talk about putting the plan into action, so implementation. We generated a lot of good ideas as far as projects, and a good way to think of the Complete Streets Master Plan is sort of like a wish list of all the projects that the city would ever want to have. And when you put together a list of that magnitude, you need a little kind of direction as to how to think about prioritizing what we're going to implement first and what we're going to prioritize. So as far as immediate actions for this coming year, we have a few things underway already. First is the $300,000 that's already been allocated for the school improvements. And those came directly from the improvement plans that I showed you earlier. And now they are moving into more of a construction document set for signage and striping improvements. So that is underway. And then we are seeking, we are about to put out an RFP for some sidewalk gap closures. So Carmel Terrace is high on our priority list. University and Milverton sidewalk gap closures also in the pipeline. And then we have some construction projects underway, St. Joseph Avenue and Clark Avenue. So those are set for construction next summer, and we've been developing plans for those. And in the next 2 to 10 years, these are some of the things that we'll be thinking about. So design and construction for a couple of the kind of more, the projects that I just mentioned. So moving those into the next phase, the Safe Routes to School improvements, phase 2, which will include more of the kind of curb extension, sidewalk, more of the construction side. Phase 1 is signage and striping. Phase 2 will be kind of other things. And some trail resurfacing as well. Concept plan line drawings, we can keep refining some of those with community input and do a little bit of further design work and analysis on the concept plan line drawings that we'd like to move forward with. And also we will be talking about funding, so design and construction for things like the Los Altos Loop and the other high priority projects. So here is a little bit more detail about those plan line drawings. The purpose of them was to really engage the residents early and kind of start visioning early. And we chose the areas for consideration based on council direction, staff, and CSC direction. And the idea here was really to kind of get the ball rolling on, kind of starting to design and starting to vision what we might want in those areas. A lot of the areas were kind of adjacent to the high school because we'd received feedback that there was some traffic and speeding issues in those areas, for example. And then some of the other ones were the, some of the more heavily like bicycle and pedestrian traffic streets in the city. The other idea here was to start preparing exhibits for kind of future grant opportunities. So having an exhibit is an essential first step to applying for grant funding. These are some of the funding sources that we have considered and will be considering. So some of these are state grants, some of these are regional grants, and then some local sources as well. So the capital improvement project and traffic impact fees. And another recommendation of the Complete Streets Master Plan, and something that we've actually already started to do in the last couple of years, is kind of combining the priorities of the street resurfacing program with the priorities of the CSMP. So this gives us an opportunity to kind of use the funding that's already allocated in the CIP for things like resurfacing and signage and striping and concrete repairs, to kind of fold that funding into a larger streetscape project that incorporates the needs of the resurfacing project and also the needs of the CSMP. So this is an example at El Monte, where we kind of used this strategy of kind of combining multiple funding sources. It also gives us an opportunity to really engage residents on a more focused design as a part of the street resurfacing program. So if a street needs to be resurfaced, we can use that as an opportunity to implement some of the CSMP recommendations. So this is on El Monte, and we resurfaced the street, and we also added, if you want to go to the next slide, a few other enhancements. This is during construction. And on the next slide, we have kind of the final product of bikeways, a pedestrian walkway, some protection from vehicles with the buffer, enhanced crosswalks. So this is something that we would like to continue doing, where we can combine kind of the different improvement projects in the city to really kind of focus our efforts. And now we'll talk about next steps. So these are the next steps for the Complete Streets Master Plan. In September, this last September, a couple months ago, the Complete Streets Commission reviewed the entire draft. Previously, they'd seen each component at every step of the way, of course, and given feedback. But in September, they reviewed the entire draft, and they decided to forward the draft plan to council, to you all. And so that's why we're here now. So today is our special study session. The plan is to receive feedback from council and from the public. The plan has been posted online for the last several months, and we've been receiving some public input. And so that opportunity for public comment will remain open until December 10th. And that's when we'll close the public comment, and that's when we'll begin revising the plan. So the revision of the plan will include all of the feedback we've received so far. So that includes from the Complete Streets Commission. That will be the feedback received tonight from council members and from the public. It will include all the other public comment that we've received in various formats, emails, calls, etc. And it will include some feedback that we received from the Climate Action Plan as well, Climate Action Plan Committee. And then in January, all the revisions will take place. February or March, we will bring the plan back to you for hopeful adoption. We've received some comments so far. At the time that this presentation was created, we'd received about 15. I think today, in anticipation of this meeting, I received maybe about 15 more. So receiving some more comments, and I imagine that we'll receive more in the next couple of weeks after this meeting. So everyone out there, please keep in mind that you have until the 10th to send us your comments, 10th of December. The majority of the comments we received are kind of smaller edits and things that can be easily addressed. In some cases, we've received comments from the public about maybe, a spot improvement in their neighborhoods. We've kept track of those. And we received a kind of a few like larger recurring comments that we plan to incorporate. And one of those was to kind of explain the nexus between the plan line drawings and the priority projects, which I've kind of explained verbally here tonight, but that was kind of a little bit of a hole in the document, so we're going to fill that in. And then we wanted to present you tonight with kind of a summary of the other commission feedback that we've received so far, just so that you can have an idea of the feedback we've already received and what we're planning on implementing as far as edits to the plan. So this can kind of inform the feedback that you give tonight. So the Complete Streets Commission gave quite a bit of feedback. Some of the commissioners provided feedback in writing, and we discussed it at the recent meeting. So one of the comments that they provided was that we should include an executive summary. It's a long plan, it's a couple hundred pages long, and for the layperson at home, perhaps not the easiest to relate to. And so we thought an executive summary could really help kind of put everything in perspective and kind of explain how the plan works. And we could kind of think of this as a CSMP user guide for residents. And they also wanted us to commit to updating the plan regularly to keep it fresh, to keep it evergreen. So that's something that we plan to incorporate. They wanted discussion about parklets and outdoor dining options, which we thought was a good recommendation. They wanted a little bit more of an explanation of the process for kind of delivering the projects. And then also to refine the concept plan line drawings, make some of them a little bit more legible. So we thought that was good feedback and plan to incorporate that. I also met with the Environmental Commission, I believe it was the Climate Action Planning Commission, and they gave some really good feedback. I had a nice discussion with them about it. They had a request in general for more class 4 separated bikeway facilities. They particularly mentioned San Antonio Road as a good location for that. So we're going to look into that recommendation. We're also going to include mention of kind of coordination between the Climate Action Plan Committee and the CSMP. So kind of opportunities for collaboration and coordination in terms of streetscape improvements. So mentioning that in the plan for consistency. And they also had a request for more traffic calming. So that's the feedback we received so far. And at this point in time, we will take your questions and your comments and open it up to discussion. Jeff will be helping me answer questions, and Jim and Jaime will be here at some point soon to help answer questions as well.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Great job. I know how much work went into it, and it's obvious, and I'm happy to hear that our Complete Streets commissioners, who we all have a lot of respect for, were working with you guys through this entire process. So that's very reassuring and appreciated by council. So let's dive in. This is a study session, so we can combine both questions and comments. I see Councilmember Weinberg, who is the council liaison to the Complete Streets Commission and served on the task force, wants to kick us off. So Councilmember Weinberg, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Marissa and Jeff, for this presentation. I thought it was a very good presentation, very informative, and I think very well laid out. On top of that, I really want to thank staff and the Complete Streets Commission. There has been a tremendous amount of effort that has gone into this project. Aside from what we have seen in the form of the draft, I've attended virtually all the community engagement meetings, and really what staff and Altos, our consultant, did, I think it is quite a model of how to engage the community, and not just engage them in terms of giving people an opportunity to see what's being planned, to see what's being thought, but there's been a lot of active listening and engagement. I see that a lot of what we have before us today has changed from what things look like even several months ago. So I really want to thank everyone for that. And our Complete Streets Commission is not a shy commission. They are very, this is a very smart and engaged commission as well, and they let their opinions be known, and their opinions are constructive. And again, I think that Alta and staff did a very good job of listening and incorporating what was being heard. So we don't have a plan that is simply a recitation of what someone could find in some textbook somewhere. I think we really do have a plan that is designed for the needs of Los Altos. So thank you very, very much for that. There are a few questions and suggestions that I'm going to give. I think kind of to start, one area where I think the document could be improved is to really explain what is a complete street. I mean, people hear the word complete streets, and I've even heard commissioners say, what is a complete street? And of course, a complete street is going to be different based on the type of street that one is looking at, and also the time at which you're considering it. So maybe at one point there's a street that's leading to a school, or maybe the school reorients itself, or they close an access way. So now what was once complete could change. But complete streets, as I understand it, is really, it's a way of looking at how a particular street should accommodate the people who use that street, and more broadly, how it is incorporated into the network of streets that we have in Los Altos. And I think that you've done that, but you've buried some of it in Chapter 7. It would be useful to have your prioritization table, which shows the breakdown, the percentages of what you're looking at in terms of determining what's a higher priority project and what's a lower priority project. I would put that more to the beginning. So as people get into this and identify where there may be some opportunities for us to improve, and then later what those improvements might look like, they're looking at that already with the framework of, oh, this is the methodology that we used when we were trying to determine what is a complete street. And now I understand why this street maybe has a higher priority in this document than this street does. Something else that I think would be useful is to emphasize that, well, this may not be a living document. It is a document that is a picture in time. And what we identify as a high priority now, 5 years from now, may not be as high a priority as something that is prioritized lower in the plan. I just think that it's useful to put that in there so that when someone is looking at this 5, 10, 15 years from now, they don't say, well, this isn't what the master plan said. Why are we doing it this way and not that way? One of the things that I thought was really great about this project, I mean, this was the interactive website where you could draw your route on there and put in comments where there was a barrier. That was really cool. I've never seen something like that, and it was an awesome tool. I think it would be useful for you guys to put into the draft plan an explanation of how that data was used. It's fairly obvious how the survey was used, and of course you've got the survey results in there. Anyone can look at it. I don't think that many people are going to go back to the interactive website and look at all 2,000 comments, but I think it would be useful for people to understand that really was a driving tool that helped shape what was going on here. Let's see, something that you mentioned in your presentation, but I'd like to see teased out a bit more, is how both the proposed bike network and the pedestrian network interact and interface with the networks that we have more broadly in our community, in our county, in our surrounding communities. It's great that you showed the map and you have in the plan the map showing how our bike routes can meet with some of the other major bike routes around there. But if I'm looking at planning, if I want to commute to Stanford, say, how do I not just connect with what's on El Camino Real or Foothill, but where do I go to get information about those routes? I think that would be useful. Even if it's just a link to maps that other cities have put out, I think it would be useful for our community to see not just the Los Altos loop, but really how the networks interact all together. All right, just look at my notes here. Oh, table 7, the spot improvement table, I think really could use some clarification. In going through the table, I didn't understand what the numbers and the X's in the grid stood for. And it's also, it's laid out in an unintuitive way. I think what you've done is, because you were limited by 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, you envision the complete streets plans being open as a book, and someone would be able to see across 2 pages how the diagram works. But it doesn't really come across that way. And I think the reality is that there's very few people who are going to look at the complete streets plan in book form. Most people are going to do, most people I think are going to look at it online. Some people will do what I did, which was to print out a copy and put it in a 3-ring binder. So I was able to open up my binder, put the sheets together, and I got it. But anyone who can't do that, even if you're just looking at it on screen where you can't easily move the pages around, if you're just looking at it in a scrolling PDF, it's not logical. And I think that there's an opportunity to convey information that's lost. So I don't know, maybe you can put in an attachment so it's in a larger page form. Given that most people are going to look at this in digital form, maybe you can have those tables on shrunken pieces of paper, not paper, but shrunken page size, kind of like you have on the maps on Exhibit D, with the understanding that people will be able to zoom into it easily on their computer. And there are a couple of other places where that occurred as well. But table 7 really struck out to me, and I still don't understand what those numbers and the X's mean. Let's see. Exhibit C, I also found difficult to read, I think for the same reason. I think it would also be helpful to start off Exhibit C by revisiting a diagram and an explanation of what class 1 through 4 bike lanes are. I know you showed it on screen, and I know it's elsewhere in the complete streets plan, but if someone is jumping to Exhibit to Appendix C, I think it'd be useful for them to see that as well, so they don't have to go back and wonder what's a class 1, what's a class 2 bike lane. And finally, on Exhibit D, I think it would be useful if you could add a table of contents. So at the beginning of Appendix D, I could go just to that page and find out exactly where the concept line is for a particular project.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. Really good feedback and ideas. Thank you. I can go next. I don't see any hands raised. Happy to get us go next. But council members, this is our opportunity to give feedback to the team so that they can refine it some more so it's ready for us to adopt next year. So let me jump in. So I have both questions and comments, and I'll go back and forth in no particular order. So again, big thanks to the team and everybody involved. I appreciated many things about the plan, but one thing I want to comment on is the fact that while we were developing this master plan, we were still doing work in the community. So you're basically you're flying and fixing the plane at the same time. And that really stood out for me, the fact that there were still projects being completed while you were developing the plan. So I really want to recognize and thank the team, Jim and everybody else for all the work that went into this. I was in San Francisco over the weekend, and I knew this was going to be on our agenda on Tuesday. So I made a note that I would mention this, but I hope whatever plans we have, and I see the draft plan and I see all these colors. For me, going into the city, somewhere I lived for almost 8 years, the red striping, the green striping, the turn lanes, it was very, very confusing. And I'm sure people who live in the city understand all the different striping, but one thing I want to make sure is that when we implement our plans for Los Altos, that they're simple, that residents are able to see the improvements to the streets, the line drawings, whatever it is, and understand, what they mean. And so please, as we move forward, I don't want our streets to look, and I'm not criticizing any other city, but for our city, I would really appreciate it looking very simple for our residents and not too confusing. So Councilmember Weinberg touched on this a little, but he didn't actually say it. And I made a note of this when I reviewed the plan. I actually think it would be helpful to have a glossary. So it could either be in the back or in the front, but I know as we go through the plan, you're explaining what different terms mean. But I think it would be very helpful if you have just, in the back, table of contents glossary. So if people are reading through, like, what does that mean again? They can flip to that glossary and find the definition. Going through my notes. On the ranking criteria, I was trying to reconcile what was in the packet and what was on page 33 of your presentation. So in the packet, and let me make sure I find the right page. It has safety on page 7. It has safety as number 6 and 10% as the ranking percentage. But then separately on page 33, when you have safe routes to school, that has 20%. And I'm trying to reconcile those numbers and also understand why safety, which I know is a priority for us, is number 6 and only 10%. Is this a former approach that you're mentioning here? Can Marissa or Jeff explain that?
I can jump in and Jeff can tune up what I say or clarify if necessary. Safety in that list was referring specifically to collision reduction. And so in the presentation today, we clarified that a little bit and we referred to it as collision reduction because it was a little bit confusing as it was before. So safety as pertaining to the 10% relates to collision reduction, and safety is also baked into almost all the elements of the plan, safe routes to schools and all of the other things in a more general sense of the word safety. So we clarified that.
And I think that's important, knowing how much our residents value, as they should, safety. I think it's very important to make sure that's crystal clear. So I recognize that we launched this in the middle of COVID, and I know you have explained that we're going to revisit some of this data and refine and fine tune it. But how do we really fine tune the data? What does that process look like, knowing that what we saw during COVID isn't reality once, we go back to normal, whatever that is, and still nobody knows what that next normal will look like. So I'm just curious, how do you reconcile, what we saw during COVID and what we expect going forward, or what we saw pre-COVID?
Yeah, one area that I can speak to that first is with regards to the school areas and the improvement plans. And so since this plan was kind of, generated during COVID, the schools were not in session. The first round of site visits that we did were different than what we would normally do in that circumstance because there were no students present. And so we really just looked at the infrastructure and we're, looking at the infrastructure, we were able to get a decent sense enough to put together the first round of drafts for the improvement plans of what would be helpful when there are students there, things like crosswalks and curb ramps and curb extensions. It's pretty easy to look at those and see if they need refreshing or need to be reconstructed. And then during our phase 2, which is what's underway right now, in terms of the signage and striping plans for those improvements, we went out and did a whole nother set of field visits when all the students were present because the students are back in school now. So that's kind of one example of how we, kind of did the best that we could under the circumstances of COVID. And then now that school's back in session, went back out and observed the behaviors and the drop off and the pickup, which is obviously very different now, and then modified the signage and striping plans from their original state in the improvement plans to reflect the human presence as well and what we saw.
So you're using data going forward. So you didn't use data, and I don't know if we had collected data pre-COVID to even incorporate that into this process.
Yeah, I think it just kind of depends a little bit which data specifically we're referring to. Like we've been collecting traffic data, for instance, around the city for a number of years now, and we started that before COVID. So we have those pre-COVID numbers. We've done a couple of counts during COVID, which obviously are much lower, and then we'll keep doing them in the future. So I think in terms of a broad answer to your question, it would be continuing to collect the necessary data to make sure that what's reflected in the plan is still accurate.
Okay. And then on the spot improvements, and I know Councilmember Weinberg touched on this as well. And for me, this ties into the broader question about the vision for different streets. And I know one of our residents had sent in an email as well, talking about what our vision should be for collector streets, for example. And so I'm wondering if as part of this plan, we will have, decision points. For example, there are different types of improvements you can do on this type of street or this neighborhood or this part of town. But are there factors we would consider in determining what we put in those locations? And for example, are there recommendations or a suite of options that you would say for a collector street? These are the things we would recommend to achieve certain things.
Jeff, I don't know if you have a good answer to that. It sounds like what you're suggesting is maybe sort of a toolkit that kind of outlines all the different options in terms of improvements and kind of gives various different options for each different type of street, which I think is a cool idea.
Yes, Mayor. I think I know exactly what you're asking about. This plan, I think, identifies specific recommendations, still at the 10,000 foot level. So like Marisa said in a previous comment, that additional research and community input and design will be needed. But you're even thinking, I think, a step back, like for projects and streets that weren't identified here, or maybe that will change, is there a good process that the city staff can have for coming up with recommendations on their own? I think it's an idea worth considering that we can look into.
Thank you. Again, I know I'm jumping around because as I was going through the plan, I was making different notes. I noticed that for the streets listed in the staff report, West Portal Avenue was not listed, but then in the actual plan, you do have Egan and the surrounding area that has Bullis Charter. And I know at one point, the thinking was we have no idea based on what was going on in the city, whether schools would be there and how many schools and what they would look like. But the fact that we update this plan, or we should update these plans every 5 to 7 years, and assuming nothing big will happen in that location anytime soon with regards to the schools, I'm curious where West Portal Avenue falls within that list in the staff report, and it's on page. Let me find it. and maybe you know, yes, it's page 13, where you have the different concept plan line locations, and I'm just curious if West Portal Avenue is anywhere as part of the near future planning. Do you know, Marissa?
I don't know off the top of my head. Jeff, is that something that you have access to at this moment? Or maybe that's something we could get back to you with, if not.
We'll have to look into it closer, Mayor. So just let us, is it West Portal Avenue was not listed and you'd like to see it listed? Is that?
Well, I'm curious the reason why it wasn't listed. I mean, if you have a reason why it may not be one of the more immediate projects, then that's my question.
We'll have to take a look and bring that back, I think, through Marisa or through staff to let you know.
Thank you. And then I have a long list of, and this is picking up on one of the comments from a public speaker about, we have these proposed plans, but then we also say we would still continue to engage with the community as we move forward. And what we've realized with a lot of our Complete Streets projects is our residents don't get engaged until it's real, right? Until, it's close to implementation, we're actually doing things in their neighborhoods that they're actually reacting to it. I'm just curious if, as part of this plan, if we've addressed, if there are ways we can address that. And I think it's worth mentioning and looking into, only because it is so important for us to get that right. And I know it's not easy and I don't have a solution, but when we talk about community engagement, I do think it's important to figure out how we get our residents really engaged early in the process. Okay. And then I like the vision statement that you shared as part of the presentation. I think in updating the plan purpose that you have on the first page, I think the vision that you shared would be a better paragraph to open with, because it talks more about the community and complete streets, whereas I think the purpose plan you currently have is limited to bike and pet. So I think we can work on that initial vision statement, which is the first page people will see when they open our plan. And then I was very happy to hear that we're incorporating the street resurfacing program, because PCI is very important to our community. So it has been a priority for our council. And someone shared with me recently that our PCI currently is maybe a B-. And so as we move forward with that priority, I'm happy to hear we're incorporating both the resurfacing program with these complete street plan elements. And then one suggestion, I do think it would be good to have another study session on your next steps. I know you said you're going to come back to council for an adoption, but I think after January, after we've closed public comment and you've incorporated the comments, that'd be good to do one more study session before we actually move to adoption. So just a suggestion there. Okay. And one last thing, how flexible is this plan? As you know, we're moving forward with our housing element update, and this is over an 8-year period. But as the housing and the look and feel of some of our neighborhoods change, I just want to make sure that this plan is flexible enough to change with those changes, if that makes sense. Okay, I will stop now. But thank you. Councilmember Meadows.
Okay, wow. So wow, very impressive work product. I mean, this is one of the best sort of reports I've seen in a while. And, congratulations to consultant, to staff, to the task force, to the commission, everybody. I mean, really, really solid. I'm not going to repeat. I'm going to try not to repeat anything that anyone said, but I do think it bears repeating that the vision statement is very well crafted. I thought that just pulled together all the elements of what we would like to accomplish. It encompassed ages and modes of transportation and everything. So I would agree with the mayor's suggestion, start off with it, because it just, when I read it, I went, wow, this may be the best vision statement I've read ever. So anyway, so that was really good. And I do like the idea of another study session, because I feel I was reading this online and I need to ask for a printout of the next version and read it in paper, which, you know, to really absorb all the details. So I also have a few random things I'll try to go quickly. I think I heard you say that the next steps, and even when we have a final draft, that each of those individual places where we're going to be trying to work solutions, it's still an active dialogue at that point. And if that's correct, that's what I heard, and that's what is intended, I think that will work really well for our community, to have a drawing board and then still open it up to discussion. It'll make it more live in real time. I really liked how this was forward-looking. It combined the pedestrian and a bicycle experience together, and of course the auto experience as well. A couple questions. So the walk and roll maps, I'm envisioning that those are a tool that the city provides to the schools, and the schools distribute them to the parents. Is the ownership, so they've kind of been launched at that point, is the ownership still with the city? So as there are updates, you would contact the schools and then say, hey, by the way, we've got a new one. This is what you should be circulating now, or how do those stay fresh, if they, or whatever the word would be?
Yeah, I think my impression is that they would stay with the city, and the city would potentially, you know, update them at various incremental points in the future and then redistribute them to the schools.
Okay, so they're going to get something and they assume that's what it is until they hear otherwise. And do we have any idea of compliance of parents and kids with the recommended routes to schools? You know, they haven't been called walk and roll maps for a long time, but there have been. Do we know, does anyone pay attention to those?
The families, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so the walk and roll maps were also what was directly conveyed into the website and the mobile app that I was describing. And so one way that we'll be able to track that is the number of downloads. The mobile app and the website were kind of just launched recently. And so we're still kind of working with schools to fully announce them. And so that'll be one good way to monitor. And in terms of the paper maps, we have a consultant who is doing a lot of education and encouragement at the schools, and she's working with all of the schools directly. And we're also in the process of creating a subcommittee with the various different districts and schools and principals and Greentown. So I think that'll be a good time to kind of get some, a little bit of feedback on how useful they are.
Okay, good. Well, clearly you thought about this, so thanks for clarifying. So I'm one person who would also second the glossary idea, and especially the comment about, I just cannot, those class 1 through 4, whatever, bike lanes are just not intuitive to me. I can't, they don't seem to escalate where either 1 is better or 4 is better or most intense. They're just kind of all over the place. I cannot for the life of me remember them. So anytime you can include those, it would be helpful, because I need to see that. I just cannot internalize it. So then I wondered, and I didn't see this, which doesn't mean it isn't there, but I wondered about our, you know, we have a very, you know, sometimes we run into this issue where the public isn't aware that really the city owns, I forget what it is, like 6 feet of what we usually assume to be our property. And so some of these improvements may or may not make use of that city easement in front of each lot. Is that at all addressed in here, or it's not, or you'll deal with it in specific plans, or nothing that is included in this plan encroaches on the easement? It's not encroachment because the city owns it, so I realize that's a misnomer, but is that at all addressed in here? Or and if so, we need an education component, or if it's really, if we're not going to be using those easements, then it really doesn't matter. But I find the public is not aware that they don't own their land up to the street.
Yeah, all of our recommendations, as far as I know, are recommended for kind of the area that's already considered the street. So we have not made any recommendations that kind of propose expanding into the full right of way.
Okay, all right. Jim has something to say.
I just have a follow-up. I mean, there are so many projects recommended in this plan that, you know, we may come across situations where residents have expanded into our right of way. And I think University of Milverton is a good example where the sidewalk gap is. We know that there's severe landscaping that has encroached into our right of way where a sidewalk gap project would occur. So yeah, in those cases, you know, there would be community engagement and we get into those details during the design process with the residents.
Right, excellent. So I'm going to leave it at that. But again, this is really, really an excellent job of pulling all this information together, well thought out, clear. And so thanks so much for all that everyone's done who's been involved.
Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. Councilmember Lee Ang.
Wonderful job. Good work. A lot to absorb. 232 pages, a lot to absorb. So once again, executive summary, glossary, anything you can help to help simplify it would be great. Going back, I just want to remind everyone that this Complete Streets Master Plan is addressing all our multimodal vehicles, every means, meaning pedestrians, bicycle, cars. But yet the one paragraph under the vision, goals, and policy, it really emphasizes bicycle and pedestrian master plan. You know, it really doesn't talk about anything about our vehicles and that other mode of transportation. So I want to make sure that we are mindful of that and that it's not just heavily focused on just pedestrians and bicycles, and we are mindful of that. I also want to make sure we're mindful that we maintain our suburban and somewhat rural feeling in our neighborhoods. So I believe that how we make people aware, and like the mayor said, it's really important that we get the input that we want from people, because what happens is in our past experience, we have people that really don't understand what this Complete Streets report is going to mean, how it's going to affect them, their neighborhood. I mean, when we try to put in programs, and I'm going to use examples. We were going to put in traffic mitigation and safe routes to school item on Los Altos Avenue. We had people that said, this is not what I had interpreted to be. So I want to make sure that when we do our part to reach out to help people to understand what this Complete Streets plan means, they are clear on what we are presenting. We have people, we had a plan when we were going to say, oh, we're going to have these traffic lanes on Miramonte. And right now, this plan still identifies that. And you were stating that that was a high priority plan. So I am concerned that we aren't doing, conveying the right information as we do outreach. And we have to make people understand what this means. So that's my major point for that point. Some of this on like questions I would have is like on page 31, you clearly identify Newcastle as a bike route in the loop map. Then yet on page 159, you have the loop instead go to Fallen Leaf. And we clearly have Newcastle that has clear bicycle lanes or clearly identified as a bike route. So I just need to understand how we keep, it's not consistent. Because if in one area, we're clearly stating that this is the bike route map, then we change the loop. How do we get some consistency? That's one of my questions. Do you want to answer me or just point these things out and then you guys can go back and look at it, or how do we want to take it?
I think just to make sure I understand, is what you're saying that there's a kind of a discrepancy between the part of the loop between Newcastle and Fallen Leaf in various different parts of the plan, like one in the map and one in the text?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
and then you also have it in the pictures too. And then the one thing that we've always said that we were going to address is our concern about cumulative traffic impacts. This one report was supposed to help us address it, mitigate it, or how we will confront it. That is not even identified in our goal. We have a whole bunch of developments coming up. What are we doing to address cumulative traffic impacts?
Marisa, I think I can answer the one thing about the Newcastle that Councilmember Liang pointed out. I think that Newcastle was a late addition of changing it from a bike route to a bike lane. And so I think it got missed when we were doing the loops. That's a good thing that you've pointed out for us that we just missed. So we'll go back to that section and give that another look. Marisa, do you want to talk about traffic impact in this plan? I've got some thoughts there as well.
Sure, yeah. So this plan is really designed to be for mobility. And so it is trying to kind of create more opportunities for more modes of transportation. And so, I mean, one of the kind of principles behind kind of complete streets in general and from a national level is that if we give people more opportunity to travel around the city on other modes, on foot or on a bicycle, that will inherently reduce congestion because it will feel safe and accessible to walk or bike as opposed to drive. So that's kind of a high level answer. To get down into the details a little bit more, one thing that we've been doing in conjunction, or concurrently with the CSMP is doing traffic counts. So that applies specifically to, traffic and congestion, vehicular congestion. So traffic counts and putting together a model of traffic across the whole city. So that's something that's been ongoing for a couple of years now, and something that we will continue to do. Jeff, I don't know if you want to kind of add on to that.
No, I think that you got a lot of it is trying to create a balance in the transportation system so that you have more people who would like to walk or bike and not drive. That will take people off the roads, reduce congestion. For drop off and pickup, particularly, is a big source of congestion, and also just commute trips. So helping people get to transit in like downtown Mountain View, those kind of cross-jurisdictional connections, hopefully can address that traffic issue that you're talking about there,
well,
Councilmember.
As we have all these developments coming up, I mean, one of our goals was to reduce the number of collisions in the community involving people biking and or driving. So with all these developments and coming up, when people are coming out of those driveways, we really need to understand these and help mitigate them. And we're not addressing that. And I was informed that, these things will come up in our Complete Streets Master Plan. So that's just my recollection.
Yeah, I can speak to that quickly.
Go ahead,
So transportation analysis as it applies to some of the new housing developments that are happening in Los Altos is a whole other separate effort that's ongoing in the transportation department. And we have consultants on board for that too. And we are in the process of developing a whole checklist of the various types of traffic analysis and transportation analysis that will need to occur for every development. And it's broken down by development size and type of development. So that's a whole detailed focused effort that's going on as as a separate project.
Well, because on First Street, we already approved a whole bunch of development. We already know what's coming on First Street. So if we're here, I'm concerned we're missing a boat, because that's something we're supposed to be having the foresight to address now. The other thing is, as our schools are looking at other sites, and so when we look at having foresight, then it brings up my other point of making sure, and I think that others had addressed, to make sure that there's plan of, as we take input, how we're going to look at not only the future developments, but school routes, because schools are looking at acquiring another site. Schools will be changing, they're redrawing lines, and we got to be prepared to address that. So not waiting another 7 years to address it, but making sure we're flexible enough to do that. As well as, I really appreciate the idea that everybody stated that when you identified the 4 class routes of spikes, I was going to say that too, because I couldn't remember what 2B was. I was going to ask about 2B, but that photo imaging you had identifying every route was great. It should go in front of page 181 in the Appendix B, because right where everybody's streets where you're saying, oh, this will be, a class 2, so right in front of there, people can say, okay, this is the class route I'm getting, and this will be on my street. So Appendix B in front of page 181. Then the other thing was, my question is, when you say, oh, we're going to take into account, and this plan is changing because on how well things are received. So then my question is, how do you determine what items are well received or what items are not well received? Because maybe a whole community is just not aware of this plan and haven't provided input. So who are we getting that input from, and then determining what is well received and what is not well received? Help me understand that.
Okay, so for example, with the concept plan line drawings, we did community outreach. We noticed for the community outreach in various different ways. So one of those, a method we've been using lately is a mailer. So we print a postcard and mail it to every house within a radius of the project site. That seems to work really well in terms of getting people to participate. We also did a citywide mailer recently, a couple of weeks ago, to inform the whole city of this new Complete Streets Master Plan and try to get their comments and feedback and get everyone involved. And we also do kind of sandwich board type signs in the project area. So I think the main issue there is really making sure that everybody knows about what's going on. But like you mentioned, it is difficult to kind of achieve consensus. During one of the outreach meetings for some of the streets in the plan line drawings, we received a lot of feedback that people did not want the improvements and that they did not want speed bumps, for example, and a few other different things. And then later, as time went on, I started to get a couple of emails from various residents from those same streets who did want the speed bumps. And so it is all a matter of balance. And Jeff might be able to speak more to that.
I think that's right. We, at our community meetings, council member, it was resident after resident kind of saying, I do like this. And so those are the things that we kept, and the ones that were resoundingly kind of maybe not universally consensus, but the ones that had maybe 90% of people saying, we would not prefer a speed bump on our street. We don't see the need for this. That did not move forward. So it was more an art than a science. We could kind of go back to those meetings. They've all been recorded as well and have, record of that. But for the folks that couldn't make it, like Marisa said, we also received written emails giving their opinions about the concepts that were produced.
Okay, and that's where I go back to. Some people who get those postcards go, okay, what is this complete streets? They don't really realize that that means a potential of either having or not having speed bumps. So that, just wanted to provide some clarity and understanding. Also, I did that. Oh, signage. one for me. Signage is great, but sometimes when we misuse signage, then I have an issue with that. So I want to make sure that if we have signage, it's great if the signage has a purpose and it's clear. And we just don't want signage after signage after signage. And it becomes like some people start ignoring the signs because there are just too many signs. So I want to make sure that we understand the purpose of the signs and that it's clear what the signs are there for. I think there was a corner, God, I can't remember that street, where we had so many signage and so many poles sticking out. It was somewhat unsightly. So I just want to make sure that we just don't have sign pollution and we utilize our signage properly. And I think I covered all my main points, but thank you so much for everything you guys have done. Great report. But for the average resident, this is a lot to take in, a lot to read. And so anything you can do to make it easier. I mean, the pictures are great. I love all the pictures. Fantastic. Thank you again.
Thank you, Councilmember Liang. Vice Mayor, you get the last word.
I'm going to try and go fast. And I viewed this largely as a naive user because I'd had no involvement with the Complete Streets Commission or the development of this plan in any way, shape, or form. The first thing was it took me 10 minutes to find it on the website. You go to it, you can't find, where's the link to the draft plan? When you get there, it's not labeled a draft plan, it's labeled the plan. Would you please label it as a draft plan and put a link very obvious on the website that here's the current draft if you want to go read it. So that was my first user suggestion. My next user suggestion is to please add a list of tables and figures so people can look at, okay, what are all these maps? Well, you know, which one do I really want to go look at? I think that would help immensely. Another one is that making sure that we have an integration of our drop-off zones at the schools with what you're doing. We heard one of our speakers tonight talk about the impact of having a closed off drop-off zone with the high school. I live near there, so I'm very acutely aware of what she's talking about. And also, at least for the schools that have parking, which are the high schools where there's street parking, there is tremendous overflow parking right now onto at least one of the main streets where you want to put more pedestrian walkway. It's a real problem. I don't see how it will work. And so as our high schools continue to grow, and this is a part of picking up on the comment about growth, if our housing element results in 15 to 18% more people in our city in the next 8 years, and at least that much in our adjacent city, which both contributes to our population of students and to cross traffic going through our city. So I'm kind of crossing over now between school issues and what Marissa talked about with the transportation analysis. I am very worried that we have not really accounted for the potential traffic increase on the streets, as well as the student population for the kind of growth that is anticipated in Plan Bay Area 2050. And I think we need to be sure that we have somehow addressed that and addressed the reality of transportation into and around the schools. I want to echo what one of my colleagues said about being careful on certain items. There's in the table is the rapid flashing beacons. In case no one told you, rapid flashing beacons in a neighborhood area is a big problem. And I didn't go through and count how many were on there for the spot improvement, but there was a bunch. And I think we really have to look at those and be aware that that could be a problem. I want to echo what the mayor said about West Portola not being included, needs to be included, needs to be considered. The changes that happen at that school need to be considered as well. I don't know that we're prepared to really look at routes to school to the new site, but we should be aware of that by the time we get this done and permanent or approved, whether we have something ready to go for the possible route to the new school. I want to agree with other comments from Councilmember Meadows and Lee Eng about the bike lanes. I can't remember those either. I really try. And I want to echo what the mayor said about retaining our rural feeling and that we don't go striping happy so that we have lost the entire feeling of the city. That said, I would think would be very beneficial to be able to take the map that shows where the collision issues have been, and on that map, somehow be able to indicate where people can go and look at what are the projects that are proposed that will help reduce or eliminate those collisions. That map stands alone and it's there, and then you cannot, and this is a general thing, if I want to go look at, so what are we planning to do with X street, X intersection? I have no hope. As a user, I have no hope without reading all 232 pages at least 3 times to try and figure out what's happening on my street. How do I find my street? And I don't know the simple answer to that. Certainly in an interactive document, you can search for it. But again, if I'm a naive user and I pick this document up, I'm like one of our other speakers tonight, I have no idea what's really going on. And to that end, I would also suggest that on Appendix E, you explain what that is, because when someone picks this up 10 years from now, we may all not be here. And somebody else will say, oh, well, this is what they planned to do. And clearly what you've said tonight is that is not what we've planned to do. It was a concept that was presented at some meetings. Some of it carried forward, some of it didn't. I would like to see an explanation at the beginning of Appendix E that says just that. These were some initial concepts. They weren't necessarily adopted, so that that kind of don't get misremembered, if I can say that, when we get down the road. And beyond that, I think other people have said wonderful, great things. Yes, an immense effort, huge amount of work. But I am very concerned about the things that I've mentioned, especially the growth. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think there is not going to be a growth in actual vehicular car traffic in the next 10 years. There will be, and we better be sure that we are accounting for that as we are trying to plan for these other projects. And that's the last thing I'm going to end up with is you did a great job in your summary. So yes, an executive summary, but would you please, when you've got your key projects that you're suggesting we go forward with, if, and I'm talking to Mr. Sandoval now, if there's a plan or we have an idea when the repaving is going to happen for those particular areas that were identified in the summary, kind of top level ones that we want to do, we should add the planned repaving deadlines in there so that those are top of mind to people as we're working through this, to say, oops, that's next. And that may affect the relative priorities that we want to take these projects so that we're sure we're ready to go to do that project when we would do that repaving. So that, Mayor, that's the end of my comments, and thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Great job, Council. Really good feedback. And I hope it was valuable to the team. So green and safe streets for all types of transportation. And the concept plan line drawings, I know that will make us, in a better position to apply for grants. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to the next study session. Any comments from the team before I adjourn?
I wanted to say thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and thank you so much for all of the thoughtful and detailed feedback and for reviewing the plan in advance. I'm sure that was a large task, so thank you so much, and we will incorporate your comments and get back to you soon.
Great, thank you. So we will adjourn at 5:40 p.m. Thank you. And Council, see you in our closed session. Let's do a 5-minute transition. So I'll see you in the closed session at 5:45 p.m. Thank you.